Good morning. We're here today to announce the indictment of 3 men for the murder of Carey Gabay, who was shot and killed on Labor Day last year during the early morning hours in front of the Ebbetsfield houses in Crown Heights. Carey Gabay, through his hard work, perseverance, and great intelligence, rose from humble beginnings to attend Harvard University and Harvard Law School. He represented the very best that our city has to offer. Through his commitment to public service, Carey Gabay dedicated his life to improving the lives of others. At the time of his death, he worked for Governor Andrew Cuomo as the first Deputy General Counsel at the Empire State Development Corporation, the state agency responsible for business development and job creation. With me today is Police Commissioner William Bratton, along with Alfonso David, who is counsel to the governor and who worked closely with Carey. We're also joined by the outstanding detectives of the NYPD and the dedicated prosecutors in my office who investigated this case and who are going to handle the case going forward. We're also joined today by Carey's family. We have his widow Trinell, who's here. We have his mother, Audrey Hilton, who's also here. We have his sister, Crystal, and Trinell's brother, Emilio. Tragically, Carey Gabay was a victim of a war between 2 gangs here in Brooklyn, the Folk Nation and a faction of the Crips called the 8 Trade Crips. When these 2 gangs, the Folk Nation and the Crips, have been at war with each other for years, when they see each other, there is no talking, just shooting. And that's exactly what happened the night that Carey was shot. Now, as we all know, every year on Labor Day here in Brooklyn, we have a huge West Indian Day parade on Eastern Parkway. It not only draws people from all over the city, but really from all over the world. And just before each West Indian Day parade, we have a pre-dawn celebration here in Brooklyn called Juve. Thousands of people come out to Juve, where there's music, dancing, and some people celebrate in costume. Carey Gabay, who was proud of his Jamaican heritage, was out enjoying Juve that morning with his brother Aaron and 3 of his friends. As they were heading home, they were walking north up Bedford Avenue towards Ebbetsfield a little bit after 3:30 a.m. What they didn't know is that there were rival gang members in the area who were armed and who were about to shoot at each other. There were literally hundreds of people outside of Ebbetsfield and on the patio of that particular housing development enjoying Juve at the time. Now, as many of you know, Ebbetsfield is the home of many hard-working and honest people who make up the backbone of the Crown Heights community. But unfortunately, the Folk Nation has had a presence in Ebbetsfield for years. And rival gangs like the Crips view Ebbetsfield as enemy territory. And so because Juve draws people from all over to come to its celebrations, 8 Trade Crips came near Ebbetsfield that morning. Based on our investigation, we believe that there were over 20 gang members who were armed in the vicinity. As Carey and his brother and friends headed up Bedford Avenue, they approached 1680 Bedford Avenue, which is one of the buildings in Ebbetsfield. A group of 8 Trade Crips were walking south on Bedford Avenue at the same time and came in front of the building just as Carey and his group approached. The Folk Nation gang members, many of whom were on the patio of Ebbetsfield, saw the 8 Trade Crips, and the 8 Trade Crips saw them. They then pulled out their guns and they began to shoot at each other in the middle of all of those people who are out there celebrating Juve. Absolute pandemonium broke out at that time. People started running in every direction to avoid getting shot. Carey ran into the parking lot in front of 1680 Bedford Avenue to escape the gunfire. Our investigation has revealed that there were between 2 and 3 dozen shots fired from at least 8 guns that morning, mostly from 9mm, some from a .380, a .40 caliber weapon, and revolvers. Many of the shots that were fired from the patio out into the street. But there were some shots fired from the street towards the patio. One of those shots, unfortunately, hit Carey in his head, and he was gravely injured, and he died a week later. Those 2 gangs, the Folk Nation and the 8 Trade Crips, turned a joyous celebration into literally into a killing field. And by opening fire into a crowd of people, they literally showed a depraved indifference to human life. And they ended up tragically taking Carey's life. A grand jury has indicted 3 of these gang members. A grand jury has indicted Micah Alleyne, Tyshawn Crawford, and Keith Luncheon for Carey's murder. They're charged with depraved indifference to human life by mutual combat. They're also charged with gun offenses and reckless endangerment. A 4th defendant named Stanley Eleanor has also been indicted for possessing a loaded MAC-10 machine gun outside of Ebbets Field that night. Now, with respect to the defendant, Micah Alleyne, whom we've identified as a member of the Folk Nation, we have him on video with a gun in his hand during the shooting, which we'll show you shortly. He also admitted to being present at the scene with a gun and firing that gun. As for the defendant, Tyshawn Crawford, whom we've identified as a member of the Hood Star Gang, which is based in Brownsville, but is also friendly with Folk Nation. He's seen on video with a gun. He was also arrested with that same gun a few months later. And shell casings that were found where he was standing, where we allege he was shooting on Bedford Avenue, traced back to that gun that was found in his possession months later. With respect to the defendant, Keith Luncheon, who we've identified as a member of the 8 Trade Crips, he was seen with a gun on Bedford Avenue, and we have evidence that he fired that gun during the shooting. He also admitted to being on the scene and having a gun, but he claimed that he didn't fire it. As for the defendant, Stanley Eleanor, who we've also identified as a member of the Folk Nation, his DNA was found on that MAC-10 machine gun that was recovered on the scene. And we also have video surveillance of him there. We are going to go over the boards, and I'm going to show you a video of some of the relevant events that night, but I would want at this point to ask Commissioner Bratton just to say a few words.
The idea that as many as 27 firearms in this concentrated area were in the hands of these individuals, these depraved individuals, is something that no society, civilization, or criminal justice systems can tolerate, and we will not. In my history in this city, I've never seen an event in which so many individuals with so many weapons, with such depravity, committed a crime, particularly a crime which resulted in the death of this young man. An outstanding model of coming out of the same neighborhoods that these individuals live in, that we have the good and the bad and the ugly. This department is committed to working with this DA on ensuring that we eventually get everybody involved in this matter. That we cannot have this degree of depraved indifference to life anywhere in the city. Secondly, in the run-up to this year's festival, since this event, we have held significant numbers of meetings with the political leadership. This will be a very different festival this year. It will be permitted for the first time, with significant limitations and restrictions. It will be significantly policed, as it always has been, but even more so. And if so much as a sneeze comes out of any one of these gang members in the weeks running up, we will be there to not say Gesundheit, but basically to let them know that we are there. We will target this gang, these two gangs, every one of their members in the run-up to this event, to let them aware, make them aware that the depraved indifference that their colleagues, and many of them, showed on that night will not be allowed to continue. That is our commitment to the residents of this community. That will be the legacy of this death. This is a death that will count for something, because it will bring about what we believe a significant change in what should be a celebration of life, celebration of culture, a celebration of heritage.
Carey Gabay was a lawyer that worked in my office. He's a lawyer that worked with us for 4.5 years or so, and he was tremendous. This case is another example of the commitment of the talented members of law enforcement. It's also another reminder that we must address the plague of gun violence and the violence that is plaguing our streets. Although we have the strongest anti-gun law in the country, law that was signed by Governor Cuomo a few years ago, our streets are still plagued with guns. We are regulating the sale of guns in New York, but our borders remain open to guns coming in from other places in this country. Carey's death reminds us that we need to fight for comprehensive gun control legislation. We have to remind ourselves, Carey's murder cannot go in vain. It has to remind us to fight, to stand up to all those that seek to have guns on our streets, and for us to fight for comprehensive gun control legislation on the federal level. We do have the strongest anti-gun law in the country, but unless we're able to police our borders, we will continue to have more murders.
What we're going to do now is I'm just going to point to a couple of boards, and we're going to show the video, and then we'll answer any questions. The board here is important because it shows where most of the shooting occurred, right in front of 1680. This is obviously 1680 Bedford Avenue, as part of the Ebbets Field houses. We had people shooting from what's called the Patio, which is like a level here where a lot of people hang out who live in the building or live in the neighborhood. We believe that many Folk Nation gang members are up here with their guns, observing all the people in the street on Bedford Avenue. Now, this particular board shows the vantage point from the patio out to the street. We have evidence to show that there were a number of Folk Nation members on this patio shooting out into Bedford Avenue. Now, Carey and his brother and friends were walking up Bedford Avenue going home when the shooting occurred. Our investigation reveals that Carey ran into the parking lot to hide from the gunfire and was between two parked cars. This picture here shows a Rite Aid and a TD Bank. Why we have this here is because one of the shooters, Tyshawn Crawford, was firing shots along this area. We believe that he was firing shots at the A-Tray members. So what we want to do now is just to show you a video of what happened when the shots first broke out, and you can see the people on the patio running for their lives. Then you'll see a clip of Micah Alleyne firing, running into the building, and then you'll see a clip of Tyshawn Crawford. So this is a surveillance video from the patio. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, there are hundreds of people out on the patio, and there are hundreds of people on the street on Bedford Avenue, right in front of the building. And in a few seconds, you'll see people running all over the place because the shooting had just begun. Now you see they're starting to run now. Everyone is running, fleeing for their lives. Some people are running, as you can see, under the building. Some people are running towards the camera. Everyone is running to save their lives. So at this point, we believe that the Folk Nation is engaged in a gun battle with the A-Tray Crips. So this is Micah Alleyne coming up the steps with the gun in his hand. Now he stops and he hugs the wall, and we're going to have another angle of him with the gun firing into the street. And this is the door to 1680 Bedford that's closing, and he's going to run in that door before it actually closes. So the next scene, you see him up at the top. He's going up the steps. And you see him with a gun in his hand, firing out towards Bedford Avenue. Now, Alleyne runs into the building with a number of other, we believe, Folk Nation members that night. You see he just got in that door before it closed. Now he's inside the building, and we allege that he's putting the gun in his waist. We slowed it down for this video, but this all went by pretty quickly. Then he runs into the building, and we believe he rejoined the other members of the Folk Nation that night. Now, the other defendant who's been indicted, Tyshawn Crawford, I said he is a member, we believe, of the Hood Star street gang, which is in Brownsville, but they're friendly with the Folk Nation, so whoever's an enemy of the Folk Nation becomes an enemy of the Hood Stars. So this is the space between the TD Bank and Rite Aid across the street from 1680 Bedford. You'll see Crawford come out. He's wearing shorts that has a Nike emblem on it, and he's pulling out a gun at this point, and he's running into Bedford. We believe he's firing shots on Bedford Avenue. And so again, 8 Trey Crips were firing at the patio from Bedford Avenue. Folk Nation is firing from the patio, and folks who are friendly with them, like Tyshawn Crawford of Hood Star, are firing on Bedford towards 8 Trey Crips. Then there's another picture of Crawford running across the street, and we allege that he's firing at that point. How do we know? We found shell casings right where he was standing that was linked to the gun that we caught him with months later. And this is Tyshawn Crawford with the same clothes, the same Nike emblem on his shorts right after the shooting, right there near the patio. Obviously, we have more evidence than what we just showed you, but we wanted to give you a sense of the evidence that we have on video and some of the statements these guys made to police.